Thanks, Dan. Well, thank you for letting me come and share our passions as a farm. My wife here is the former librarian, so she's here to keep me honest and hi Lynn, try not to embarrass you all too much. Um, we're going to talk about kind of how our farm has evolved over the years. And speaking of years, if we survive into 2025, we will be a century farm, and that's no small thing in life. A lot of people, just because you don't make it 100 years doesn't mean you're a failure, but to get a business to stay that long is a challenge. And we're going to talk about our journey and some of our philosophy of what's got us to here today. Um, we're a very diversified operation, so we go from crops to cattle to timber to hunting. So there's never a boring day on the farm. Um, what got us here? I would say the best way to describe it is we've had a multi-generational commitment to conservation, balancing economics and environmental sustainability, a commitment to the business. It is a business that has to be professionally managed. We quit thinking of ourselves as farmers or ranchers or loggers. We start to redefine ourselves as resource managers and carbon managers, because everything we're doing basically is taking water and sunshine and carbon and converting it into a resource that we use in our society. So how do you take that philosophy and open yourselves up to being able to do a lot more with the resource than just thinking yourself as a farmer? Um, this is our mission. Uh, these are the products and services that our business provides, and these are our three goals. We want to retire with financial security. We want to have been a fulfilling environment to work and live. And lastly, we want it to be sustainable so that if somebody wants to carry it on, the future generations can continue the business. Our vision is that we will be financially secure, that we have grown and adapted, and that we're not obsolete at the end of the journey, and that if somebody wants to, they can carry it on. But a little side speech here is we need to redefine success in agriculture, and it's not necessarily if your business has successors that pass it on. A farm is simply an investment and it's a job. And if that's been great, but we don't have kids or heirs that want to carry that on, and we choose to end that business, that needs to be a success as well. And so we have been blessed that we're now looking at the fifth generation taking over the farm. But maybe someday there won't be somebody in the wings and they go sell it or lease it. It was a good life, but we don't have an interest in that. Like I said, we're running a diversity of operations from grain to cattle to timber in Nez Perce and Lewis County. Whoa, what happened here? It came back. Whoops. Um, we have more diversity, I think, in our farm than a lot of states have the entire state. The state of Ohio has 400-foot elevation from the highest to the lowest point. And for us, those around here, I think you would find that very boring. It's beautiful country, Iowa, Ohio. They've got great farmland, but one thing we don't have is boredom. And we've always believed that it's important to put family and farming and business, those three words, in the same sentence. Because if you don't have all three of those together, any one of those not at its level of excellence, you won't survive. This is just a little quiz. If you look at numbers from 53 to 64 to today, how many people one farm fed? In 55, it was 15, and 64, it was 26. And I think this data on the left is probably 7 or 8 years old data. 155 people were fed by one farm. Um, we are selling wheat for the same price today that we did 40 years ago. And how do we do that? How do we, when your price of bread is not the same as it was 40 years ago? I think a lot of the reasons we can do that is the things we're going to talk about in the rest of this discussion is capturing technology, learning how to be efficient, because it's our job to provide a reliable food source, and it's not our job to provide maximum profit to farmers and the same price increase every year. And so we do that through process improvement. It's like every day you wake up, you're thinking of how can we do it better, more efficiently, with fewer people. And what's allowed us to do that has predominantly been technology and innovation in ag industry. In 1980, my brother and cousin and I bought the business from my dad and two uncles. And so for a while there, we had 6 partners running a 2,500 acre farm. We had 4 combines, 6 trucks. We worked almost every acre on the farm 8 times, 6 to 8 times. And you got to know every little hill and thing, and you knew every single square foot of this ground by the time you saw it for the 8th time that year. Today, our 2 daughters, their husbands, and a cousin, there's 3 families are farming a much larger operation. We're 100% direct seed or no-till. We work most pieces of ground 1 time a year when it's seeded, and other than that, it's sprayed and harvested, but there's no tillage. 1 combine today is the equivalent of 8 combines we drove in 1980. That sprayer, our son-in-law, Tom, drives this Patriot sprayer. It's 120 feet long. And when I came back to the farm, my uncle was so glad that I got there because he was tired of running the sprayer. And on a good day, you got 100 acres. It was an old John Deere combine converted to a sprayer because it had a leveler on it. And now, if Tom doesn't spray 1,000 acres in a day, it's not a good day. So it just, the semis that we run today are replacing 4 2-ton trucks. So you can see this was a harvest crew on the left. For not a very big operation, the harvest crew today is smaller than that number of people by far. We grow up to 12 different commodities, a lot of biological diversity on the farm and between the different elevations, different kind of soils. 6 different kinds of wheat, 2 different kinds of barley, 4 different kinds of pulses, 5 different kinds of oil seeds, grass seed, 2 different kinds of hay. And I'm going through this pretty quick because we're going to talk in a minute about what are each one of these crops. And it doesn't matter what's important for me as a farmer and what's fun to grow. What's really important to you all is what do you do with it? What does it turn into? What do you need to consume as a consumer? And how do we connect what you're consuming to what we're growing? Because one of our challenges historically is we grew stuff because we wanted to grow it. We didn't think about what does the consumers need and how do we try to grow what you want, not what we like to produce. So this first slide, we're going to talk about mustard, and this sets a pattern for several more of these. But there's a little story behind this. We were growing a field of mustard. There was over 300 acres of mustard in this field. And my niece was going to come ride on the combine that day. And she has a PhD in nutrition. And I knew I was going to get the 20 questions routine. So I was ready for her. Because I knew what questions she was likely to ask. How many acres are here? What's the yield going to be? What do you do with it? And I just was ready for it. I tried to anticipate every question that she would have. So I was ready for her. So that particular field was 300 acres. We grow 300 to 600 acres a year of mustard. Average yield, 1,200 pounds. If mustard oil is about 33 to 37% in that mustard seed, 1 acre produces 7,000 ounces of oil. So if you're into hot dogs and you put 1/4 of an ounce of mustard on a hot dog, 1 acre makes mustard for 28,000 hot dogs. So before she even sat down the combine, I said, I know you're going to ask a bunch of questions. How many hot dogs do you think the mustard in this field could go on? And just her mind just went, boom. But we worked through the math, and she's never forgotten the statistics. So in that field, we had enough mustard to put on hot dogs for 10 Super Bowls. What's the point of this? Some of these specialty crops, you can flood the market in 1 year if you don't look at what's the demand and how much you need to really grow so that you're keeping a balance between supply and demand. So the rest of these slides will go through much more quickly. We're simply taking crops that we grow and converting to, based on what we yield, what's it used for, and how does this relate to the things that you buy on a daily basis. So soft white and club wheat are 2 of the predominant wheats grown in this region. With an 85 bushel yield, 1 bushel yields 42 pounds of flour. It's the most prominent wheat for cakes, pastries, flatbreads, crackers. We export probably 75 to 85% of our soft white wheat to the Pacific Rim. It's a major wheat that's consumed by the Asian people for noodles and things like that. But you can make beer of it too, and so 1 bushel will make 384 bottles of beer. Or 45 16-ounce packages of noodles. DNS, Dark Northern Spring, this is your top quality cooking wheat. This is what your, if you want the really good quality bread, this is the highest protein at 14%. And if you don't make 14%, you get huge discounts on price. So at a 60 bushel yield, we can produce 4,320 loaves of bread per acre. That's a lot of starch, right? A lot of carbohydrate. What's in bread? Carbs.
Jack, I have a question.
Okay.
Is that gluten?
Well, gluten is a part of the component in wheat, and that's one of the things a lot of people have intolerance to. But the protein is not necessarily gluten. Gluten is just a component of that, the protein. That's unique to wheats and grains. Unlike beets, there's no such thing as gluten-free beets, but they put that on the label of the stores. Drives me crazy. It's a vegetable. It doesn't have gluten. Never would. Okay. Oil seeds are a key part of our rotation. We grow spring canola, fall canola, and also fall rape or industrial rape, which is a completely different kind of rapeseed oil. So spring canola, if it yielded 1,700 pounds, winter canola typically can yield almost twice the yield. Canola is about 46% oil. So 100 gallons of canola, gallons per a ton of raw canola seed. So what do we do with it? Does anybody know where the term canola came from? Where does it come from? Canadian oil. The Canadians took industrial rape and they hybridized it to make the oil edible and to make the meal edible to animals. So you can not only eat the oil, but we can feed the meal as a very valuable byproduct as a protein source, whereas the industrial rapeseed meal is toxic to animals. So the Canadians developed this thing and said, what are we going to call it? And they said, well, it's made in Canada and it's oil. Let's call it canola. But it's not what some people come down the road and they say, you guys going to grow any of that granola this year? And there's a difference between canola and granola, okay? So industrial rapeseed is just a generic term, but canola is an edible rapeseed variety, whereas industrial rapeseed is a high quality oil that can be used as a substitute for all your motor oils. But it's high in glucosinolates and it's high in linoleic acid, and those two elements are what make it industrial rape. And the Canadians figured out a way to make low linoleic acid and low glucosinolates, which made the meal edible and made the oil edible. So there's your biochemistry. I told you bigger words than I even know how to pronounce. When you're going down the highway and you see a yellow field, it could be canola, it could be winter rape, it could be mustard, and it could be safflower. And if you see something you think you're going colorblind and it's blue, it's another kind of oilseed. What is it? It's flax. Absolutely gorgeous, but it looks just like a canola field, but it's got blue flowers instead of yellow flowers. Yeah. Yeah, but they don't know. They're hard to tell apart. You have to get really close and look at the leaves to tell a canola plant different from a mustard plant. Pulses is the other key part of a rotation, and a pulse can be a pea or a lentil or a chickpea. Some people have experimented with faba beans. They're typically about 25% of our total farm acreage. A dry pea typical yield could be 2,500 to 3,000 pounds to the acre. One serving of split pea soup is about takes a quarter of a pound of peas. So 1 acre can make 10,000 bowls of soup. That's a lot of split pea soup. It's a love-in crop for many reasons. The nutrition, it's probably one of the lowest cost sources of food protein that you can buy. Globally, it's 75 to 85% of what we grow is exported to the Pacific Rim, particularly the countries that are vegetarian, and they love our lentils, our peas, our garbs. But another thing that's really critical is that it's a nitrogen fixation crop, and when you grow these crops, you're naturally pulling nitrogen out of the air that reduces for the next wheat crop almost 25 to 30% of your fertilization. So you're lowering your chemical and your fertilizer input costs by keeping these in your rotation. We grow both feed and malt barley, and that's my wife and I enjoying sharing a Corona beer, and I cannot believe that that's our junior in high school, Caleb grandson, sophomore in high school. He's a lot bigger than that right now. But 1 ton of barley can help make 400 gallons of milk. And if you feed that with some canola meal and some alfalfa, you can utilize several of the products that we grow there. It can make 12,800 bottles of craft beer. That's a lot of beer for 1 ton. That's only half an acre. And it's also a really valuable protein concentrate. A lot of people that use fish meal for some of their protein sources this is a specialty use of the barley as a meal, and it's about half the cost of fish meal. And with the emphasis on alternative energy sources and biofuels, barley can be used to make ethanol. It's really an expensive feed source. Soybeans and some of these other crops are far cheaper to provide. So I doubt we're going to see a lot of barley be going into ethanol when it could be made into beer and more valuable things. Hay is one of our lower crops in our rotation. We grow both grass hay and alfalfa hay. A ton of alfalfa can convert to 333 pounds of live beef. If you figure about a 6-to-1 conversion feed to gain, or you can make 900 gallons of milk. So if you were growing 600 acres of alfalfa, we could help make 1.6 million gallons of milk. Yes. It's all dry land. Yeah. Yeah. And our hay yields can go from 1.5 tons to 5 depending on the year. We don't really grow hay to sell. We basically grow hay to feed our cattle herd. So we always try to have a little extra in a dry year. We're cleaning out our old inventory, and in a really good year, we'll have hay to sell. But it's hard to make hay return a profit in this part of the world. If you're in irrigated country where you get 4 to 5 cuttings, that's where you really do well as a hay grower. But we use hay more as a rotation crop, or it's marginal ground that just can't grow crops very well. We used to grow a fair amount of bluegrass and some other intermediate wheatgrasses. They have not fit with our rotation. They're tough to manage. They're tough to market in a market that is a feast or famine. And there's a lot of environmental issues associated with trying to burn the straw. Idaho can still burn, but most other states, Washington and Oregon, have absolutely prohibition against any field burning, which makes it very difficult to grow grass seed. On a home yard, you use about 10 pounds per acre to seed your yards. And so you can see where it doesn't take very many acres to come up with enough grass seed to pretty much, we could put every single home in Lewiston with nice bluegrass seed off of the Camas Prairie is one of the largest centers of bluegrass production in the world. Them in the Willamette Valley, and where Lynn comes from, it's a natural environment that loves to grow grass seed. But we've not grown any grass for several years. So what has changed in how we farm? Many years ago, we decided it was not sustainable to keep plowing and working ground 8 times and watching wind and water erode our soils. It just was not sustainable. So a lot of farmers started gathering together to figure out how we could do it different and looking at conservation, tillage, reduced tillage, and no-till. And so it was a long journey with a lot of experimentation. But in that journey, the manufacturers, red, green, or yellow in the Midwest, don't manufacture things for our world, our crops, our hills. So basically, you take something and then you remodel it to make it work in our part of the world. So we've tried about every size and color there is. We've worked with neighbors to form alliances so that we can trade equipment and share. The biggest thing is that we had to start lengthening and diversifying the rotations. In the 1980s, you saw a lot of this country was wheat and peas and maybe some summer follow. And as you start extending your rotation, you start building a much more viable soil life, and you start getting the disease cycle stretched out where you don't have to use as much chemical. So we went from plowing in the early 80s to, by the early 90s, we were using chisels or discs, leaving the residue on the surface. We were ripping fertilizer and seeding into that very rough stubble. And by 1999, we were 100% no-till, where basically the only thing that went underneath the surface of the ground was a drill. And it was putting 2 different kinds of fertilizer or 3 different kinds of fertilizer and seed all in one pass. So we use a heavy harrow or a Schulte mower to manage residue, but outside of that drill, nothing goes under the soil other than the drill. In 2000, we were one of several people who started the Pacific Northwest Direct Seed Association. And the original 12 members of the board, we were called the Jones Gang because they thought we were committing economic suicide. And today, the predominant method of farming in the Northwest is this system. But it took a lot of skepticism and a lot of training, a lot of education, and also people realizing the economics are just not there to work ground 8 times a year and then have your soil wash away and have that be sustainable. A lot of transitions occurred in that we started looking at computerization of sprayers and drills. Virtually everything on the farm today is run with a computer where it steers it, where it automatically applies. If you speed up or slow down, if you want 10 gallons the acre, you get exactly 10 gallons the acre, and there's virtually no overlap. Years ago, with some of this equipment trying to spray, you think you're on your track and you look down and you go, oh my gosh, I'm 50% overlap. It was crazy. So think of the duplication of chemicals, the duplication of labor and equipment, where that inaccuracy was just crazy. All of our data now in the combines is recording yields and even up to protein. So today we have 2 different kinds of drills, a hoe drill, which is a little more aggressive. It's like a chisel point that goes in the ground, and a disc drill that simply slices the ground and puts seed in. They both have different applications. But this is what we don't want to do anymore. If you went up to the Palouse and drove from here to Spokane, you saw this every year. Massive erosion where millions of tons of dirt was washed out of fields and is ending up along roadways. It was ending up in our rivers and streams. Today, that picture on the right is basically a field that's been harvested, and that is a standing stubble. And when the drill grows through there, it looks kind of black, but after the first rain, you can hardly tell that the drill's gone through that field. This is what we don't miss. Well, I kind of miss the plowing. There's just something about being in a tractor on a Saturday with the football game on where you're just flipping dirt and you're just going around the field flipping dirt. It was kind of fun. But then every year you had to go pick up all the rock you dug up. And so 6 of us would spend 6 weeks in the spring, 6 weeks in the fall picking rock. We just don't hardly pick rock anymore because you don't dig it up out of the ground. That cultivator on the right, we would work, sometimes we cultivate the same field 3 or 4 times a year. Peas, you had to level the plow ground, and then you had to work the chemical in 3 times. It's like, God, I'm so tired of this field. How many times am I have to work this field? So those are days of past. That's the old combine sprayer that would spray 100 acres a day. Now a sprayer like that one on the right will do 600 to 900 acres a day. We've always been politically correct, so we had a drill that was politically correct. We had yellow, green, and red all the same thing. So we didn't discriminate against Caterpillar or John Deere or Case. That drill just had one problem. It was a disc drill with everything on wheels, and when you turned downhill, the drill tried to patch you up. So again, it worked nice in Iowa and flat ground, not in our part of the world. The technology that computerization has given us has totally changed how we farm every acre. Oops, what in the world? Hmm. So each combine has a yield monitor where every acre that you harvest is creating data, and then you can turn that into a yield map that shows where's the high, medium, and low yielding part of your fields. That data is then plugged into your, basically a variable rate map where we put that in a drill. And so we can put high rates of seed and fertilizer on the ground that has high potential. We can put low rates of seed and fertilizer on marginal ground. And we're not burning up the poor ground. We're not wasting nutrients. And it substantially changed. Today, the variability in our fields is substantially less than it was 30 years ago. And a lot, this is, you look at, we might spend less total dollars in fertilizer, but have substantially better yields overall because we're putting the higher nutrients on the ground that can produce it. We're not wasting nutrients on the poor ground that used to be burned up because it was getting too much fertilizer and producing nothing. Direct seeding, as people ask you all the time, what's direct seeding? What's the difference between direct seeding and no-till? Just, if you think about it, anything that goes in the ground is going to till, even if the drill doing one pass. So there is no such thing as no-till, but no-till has been the term that society has figured out is something with the least amount of tillage that's going to put crop in the ground. And when we created the Direct Seed Association years ago, this slide became our number one educational tool. What happens when you use a single path system to put seed in the ground? We actually started increasing carbon dioxide sequestration. Instead of lowering organic matter, we're increasing it. We're improving air and water quality because we're not eroding soil and we're not having dust go in the air. We're improving wildlife because we're leaving stubble on the surface. The average, this is 20 years of data, we were cutting fuel consumption by 3 to 4 gallons an acre to produce the same crop, to get it to harvest. And it was showing that financially we were seeing a better return on investment by farming this way. So that's kind of everything you want to know about direct seeding on one slide. If it's so easy, why isn't everybody doing it? There's a lot of really good farmers that still do tillage, and we need to be okay with the fact that they're doing the best job they can. There's a lot of reasons why people have not changed. It takes a complete change in your production, your cultural systems. There's no cookie cutter approach. What works here doesn't necessarily work in a 9-inch rainfall place in central Washington. So farmers have had to gradually figure it out. How do we take more sustainable farming systems and apply it in our own regions? And that's where things like the Direct Seed Association has really excelled, with breakfast groups and peer groups where people share data every day on how to do this. Let's switch to forestry. We started doing our own logging and forest management more aggressively in the late 80s, early 90s. And when you're logging, you're kind of like an artist. You can make an ugly picture or you can make a pretty picture. And it takes a few years to look back and see the consequences of your actions. but we mark every stand before a logger ever goes in. For a long time, we were planting 8 to 10,000 trees a year, bringing the Mexican planting crews in, and these guys are absolutely amazing. One good planter can plant 1,000 to 1,500 trees a day. But those trees that we did in the late 80s, early 90s are now 30 and 40 foot tall. So these are things that we won't see in our lifetime go to market, but our grandkids and our kids may see them come in our lifetime, their lifetime. So a little bit of same economics here. 1 acre can produce 5 to 10,000 board feet of logs over probably a 25 to 30-year cycle. It takes 80 to 100 years to grow a tree. But if you look at this lower left-hand picture, that was a stand where we took a thinning operation and went in and thinned it out. And before that, those trees absolutely were not growing. They're all starving for water and sunshine, and nothing was really growing. But once you open these stands up and these trees have light, they have enough water, the growth rate on those things will go out to an eighth to a half an inch of growth rate per year. Right now we have an operation that unit up in the upper left-hand corner is a mulcher that will go along and just grind up a tree. They're cleaning a lot of these roadways on both sides of the road for fire management, and then when they get done, they look like a park. So thank your congressman for funding these kind of things. We could never afford to do this as landowners, but they're realizing it's good to invest in fire management rather than spending money trying to put fires out where we've not managed these forests. On the cattle side, it's the small part of our operation. We've done everything from sell calves right off the cows to running cows all the way through the feedlot. A couple of things when we talk about sustainability, one is quality assurance is a huge issue in the livestock industry. A lot of education on proper stock handling, trying not to overuse whips and hot shots. And there's a lot of consumer concern about over use of antibiotics. We have what we call a herd health protocol where we look at everything that needs to be done for every calf, every cow, every horse, every bull. And that is reviewed by veterinarians where they go, okay, if you're doing this, you don't need to do that. But looking at this as a system, we're probably using a third of the things we might have if we just go to the vet clinic and say, we're going to brand tomorrow, what should we use? We're going to wean tomorrow, what should we use? And they'll give you everything that you could put on an animal. If you're shipping cattle to a feedlot, how many of you have heard the term traceability? Nowadays, we're almost able to track if you eat a loaf of bread or if you get a package of blueberries, we can track that back to where it was raised, what farm and what processor did it. And that's what the consumer wants. They want to know their farmer, they want to know where this stuff comes from. Well, if we ship cattle to a feedlot without this information, we might have given those animals everything they need in the way of antibiotics. But if the feedlot gets those cattle and they don't have this data, what do? They give them the same stuff again. So it's important to have good documentation on what you're doing, and whether you're feeding the cattle yourself or you're selling them to somebody else that's buying these cattle, that piece of paper goes out there with the truckload. And now we've just eliminated a whole bunch of duplication of chemicals. They're still safe, but it's economically foolish, and it's not helping health. If you already had a shot, like as many often as I get punctured, I make sure my tetanus shot is every 10 years. But if I got a tetanus shot and got another one tomorrow, all I would have is another sore arm, but it's not going to help me. And I think we need to be conscious about how do we reduce the amount of things we're putting in animals. It's just the right thing to do for consumers. My mother hated hot iron brine. She bugged my dad, so there's got to be a better way. In the 60s, we pioneered the development of freeze branding with the University of Idaho, and it's probably one of our proudest accomplishments of animal welfare. It's a painless process, doesn't damage the hide. It's a copper iron, super cooled in dry ice and alcohol. And what it does is it kills the color pigment producing part of the hair cell, and the hair grows back white. So you're not damaging the hide, you're not hurting an animal. And when these brands go black, they're pretty cool. One 1,250 pound steer makes 650 pounds of steaks, roast, short ribs, brisket, and hamburger. A lot of byproducts coming off of beef. We have a lot of land that's marginal ground or pasture that we almost have to be in the cow business to utilize that resource. There are probably days where you wonder, why are you in that? But it all fits together. Hunting and recreation are another part of the operation. For a long time, we had a fee-based program, and then the insurance companies have come back now to where the liability insurance to charge people is more than what we generate. So now it's a friends and family deal, but we absolutely have to control who's on our land for our own liability purposes. Not just animals, we got mushrooms, we got owls, no spotted owls, ducks, turkeys. There's pretty incredible driving from the web highway all the way to the mountain, the number of different kinds of wildlife that you're going to experience, yeah, in a 6-mile stretch. And we can't forget about our free range, sun-fed, natural, antibiotic-free chickens. So in full disclosure, when we moved to the farm in 1980, Dawn wanted a milk cow and she wanted chickens. And I did not want them. But I successfully avoided the milk cow, but if I had known how much joy these chickens would bring, I would have gone for the chickens way earlier. But she and Katie, we can't imagine not having farm fresh eggs. And the roosters and the chickens with their constant crowing going, I just laid an egg. It's a fun part of having that as part of the farm. And visitors, guess where the first place they go when they come to the farm? The chicken coop. So the farm is also a laboratory. It's a place for research. When you're consulting with farm businesses, what is not like that? All around the US and Canada, it's one thing to go out and preach. It's another thing to come back home and realize, I better practice what I preach. So it's a place to test things elsewhere and also see how these principles apply back home. In working with other clients, part of what we call a professionally managed business is simply saying you have to have a clear mission vision. There has to be good planning. People have to have clear roles and respect different roles in a business. And we can go around this circle and you go, well, that's just business. Any successful. But farming for many people has not been a business. It's been a way of life where they have not given this the attention that it should. And so it is not because they're not good producers, it's because they don't understand the importance of management that's kept them from surviving. So having org charts, having job descriptions, and having clarity on your team. And we've evolved these processes on the farm as well as consulting with others, but they're never going to be the same. The things that worked for us 40 years ago, now our kids are revisiting and they're changing some of these structures, but they still have to have these structures. The farm is a place for test plots, farm tours. Almost everybody on the farm is involved in some kind of an industry board. We have the Camp Wittman program we'll talk a little bit about, things like Young Life. Our kids are very much invested in these things. My uncle had a strong comment he always made is you can't take out of a community unless you're willing to put some back. And so people go, how can you afford to spend time going on these boards? I can tell you, everyone that has done this feels like you get more back than you ever put back into it in knowledge exchange and experiences. We have a little game called Farm Jeopardy where we try to put signs out on the crops every year. And so people drive up and down the road can see what they are. Our good friend Pete Wilson was coming up to visit with Don one day, and he was a farmer. And he said, I was doing really good. I got them all right till the very last sign of what the heck kind of crop is no hunting. We started a Camp Wittman program. It was a collaborative partnership with the Boys and Girls Club in 1986. 4 years ago, that's transitioned to a new independent nonprofit, but it's been the community's most preeminent 6th and 6th grade outdoor education facility, teens at risk camps, ag policy classes, legislative tours, retreats, team building. So if anybody has a group that needs a place to have a retreat or a camp, it's underutilized, and we've got Michelle Weimer is our executive director. Her goal is to have this where there's a waiting list to get it used. So I was putting in a pitch for Michelle tonight. It's got there's a lodge on the left. There's a boys' dorm, a girls' dorm, and there's a website at the end of this. You can go look and see all the facilities. What's the next generation looking at? Don and I, we're the Over the Hill gang. We're basically landlords. The kids are running the business, so we're very proud of what they've been able to do. But they're in transition stress mode. It's a lot goes into moving that business from generation to generation. They're trying new things with cover crops, with biofarming. They installed a new what they call reverse osmosis water system a year ago, where they are able to cut chemical and fertilizer almost in half by changing and improving basically you're turning water into a completely inert thing with no chemical, no magnetism, no nothing, so that the water doesn't tie up a lot of the nutrients and chemicals. A lot of technology goes in to do that, and they're still learning. But every part of our business is constantly under the microscope of what can we do different to be more sustainable. So I'm going to close with this little slide. How do you define sustainable? From the early 70s, I can remember people talking about holistic management. And then there was systems based. And then we talked about regenerative and consumer focused and restorative, optimally scaled and traceable. I think they invent these new words about every 3 or 4 years so we can write a new book and sell something. But the reality is all those things are very similar. But if you don't have the things across the bottom, faith-based, family-focused, run as a business, community servant, technology adopter, advocacy engaged, all those have to go together to become sustainable. Price of progress is willingness to appear foolish. This is our farm motto. And there are days where we look back and go, that was kind of crazy. But then there are days where we try something and it works. It's like it gives you the hope you can keep going. So that is the Wittman Farms journey on sustainability. And we have 45, I was right on, 45 minutes.